Okay. I'm going to introduce Zack Meisel. Zack has covered Cleveland sports, including the Indians for the last decade, including the last 4 years for The Athletic. He previously worked at Cleveland.com and MLB.com. He's a 2011 graduate of OSU and a Cleveland native. Meisel is also the author of the Ohio State Buckeyes Fans Bucket List and 100 Things Indians fans should know and do before they die. So, Zack, take it away. You can talk. We are going to have some interaction later, a Q&A section. So we're so glad Zack could join us.
Hey, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. I'm sure there are many questions about the state of the team for 2021, why they traded your favorite player, Francisco Lindor, what the new team name is going to be. We can answer all that in a minute. I thought I'd start by talking about my latest book, which you can see creatively positioned in the background so that on every Zoom call I do every day, maybe subconsciously it will get Terry Francona to buy a copy. Cleveland Rocked. It is the story of the 1995 Cleveland Indians, who went 144, which is, if they would have played a full 162 game season, they would have been one of the best teams by record in baseball history. But, the way to talk about this team is to think about how, twice in recent memory has Cleveland thrown a parade in downtown Cleveland for a team that didn't win a championship. We all know the Cavs parade in 2016, but there have been two others in the last 30 years for teams that didn't even win. So there was one 3 years ago, which was the Browns 0-16 parade on a freezing cold, I think sub-zero temperature day. I think it was a Saturday afternoon, the first week of January in 2018. I actually went there to write a story about it, and I've never been so confused in my life. I have this vivid memory of like some really, really large shirtless men. And again, it's 0 degrees. So their chests are as red as a tomato, and they're chanting about, they went 0-16. So it was very strange. What are you here for? It was the strangest scene I've seen in my life. But we're not here to talk about that. In 1995, after the Indians lost to the Braves in 6 games in the World Series, they returned home late at night on a Saturday. People greeted them at the airport. I think they stopped and pulled over on the highway as the team buses went back to Jacobs Field. And 2 days later, on a Monday afternoon, there was a parade down Superior Avenue and ending at Public Square to celebrate this team that, didn't win it all, fell short of their ultimate goal, but really galvanized the city. And it's not something you see often, but it illustrates how deeply Cleveland fell in love with that team. And it's, how could they not? First, the Indians had been in the American League basement for the better part of 40 years. There's a reason the movie Major League was made about the Cleveland Indians and not the New York Yankees. But it really starts, the story of the 95 team starts back in the late 80s when, after decades and decades of, I think we might have something here. And then you watch it play out on the field and the Indians lose 95 games. And you're like, all right, back to the drawing board. And they kept thinking they had something and they kept proving themselves wrong. They finally committed to tear everything down, trade for prospects, build the farm system. And the grand plan was to do this so that the team would really hit the ground running as they moved into a new ballpark. And so they had to get a referendum and have that pass to get approval for a new ballpark. If they didn't do that, there's a good chance the team would have moved to Tampa or Denver. They had to make the right trades, trading Joe Carter for Carlos Baerga and Sandy Alomar. They had to make the right draft picks, drafting Jim Thome, drafting Manny Ramirez, drafting Charles Nagy. They had to have patience with these minor leaguers like Albert Bell, who wanted to take a bat to everyone and everything as he was coming up through the minors. They had to have patience with Manny Ramirez, who sometimes was on Planet Manny and at other times wanted to quit baseball altogether. So everybody kind of gels, and this all comes together as they move into the new ballpark in 1994, just in time for the strike to hit. So if you ask anybody on that team, they thought that they were in prime position to contend for the World Series. They were one game behind the White Sox when the strike hit that August. But what it did was Cleveland was the rare city where when the strike ended and the players came back the following April, Cleveland was the rare city that actually people were excited. They were waiting on pins and needles to get word that the season was going to start. And whereas across baseball, attendance was down, interest was down, in Cleveland, it skyrocketed. And so you had not just the fans who were more excited than they had ever been for baseball because you got a taste the year before that this team was good. You had a brand new, beautiful ballpark. Everything was just trending in the right direction. You had added a few veteran free agents like Oral Hershiser, Dennis Martinez, Eddie Murray. And then in 95, also the players were hungrier. You know, they got so close. They thought that they were going to have a chance of making the playoffs, which no Cleveland team had done in 40 years. And then they had the rug pulled out from underneath them. So they come back in 95 as hungry as ever. And, you know, I mean, that's, I good luck finding a more fun, entertaining, cocky group of players. They had 100 wins. They had 12 walk-off wins. They had 27 come from behind wins. And as they'll all tell you, they stepped out onto the field every day knowing that they were going to just destroy the opposition. So it was a lineup filled with all-stars and Hall of Famers, from Dave Winfield to Eddie Murray to Manny Ramirez and Jim Thome hitting 7th and 8th sometimes. You had Omar Vizquel and Carlos Baerga and Kenny Lofton, and all those names had personalities too. So in the clubhouse, you had temper tantrums, you had egos, you had dancing, you had loud music, and you had Mike Hargrove tasked with trying to keep everybody on the right track. So that's the story of the 95 Indians. I think obviously the playoffs were a magical run in the first 2 rounds. And then the World Series, even though the Indians fell short, it was an entertaining World Series. Every game was close. And I think everybody felt that, you know, I think that's part of the reason for the parade is that it was step one. You know, there was going to be another chance in 96. They thought they'd be back there every year. And they did get other chances. Obviously, it turned out that 95 was as good of a chance as they would have and maybe the best team they had of that era. But it's a team that represents a stretch of baseball that Cleveland really hasn't seen ever. So that's the story of Cleveland Rocked. I don't know, does anyone have any questions or anything they want to say about that 95 team before maybe we can talk a little bit about 2021?
I'll make a comment. In college, I worked at Munson Stadium, which was home of Canton Akron Indians for several years. There was a sink that was bashed in half from Albert Bell's bat after a frustrating at bat. So he leaves a legacy of broken things where he goes.
They were about ready to cut ties with him. I know Dan O'Dowd, who was the director of player development, who basically just oversaw the farm system. He had a pretty heated talk with Hank Peters, who was general manager and president in the late 80s, early 90s. And Hank Peters told him, look, we can't put up with this guy's antics. You know, you got to let him go, release him. And Dan O'Dowd said, if you release him, our farm system has no prospects because Albert Bell is the only one. So if you want any chance at maybe having some talent on this roster in a couple of years, we have to stick with him. And Hank Peters said, okay, well, next time he acts out, Albert Bell's gone and so are you. So thankfully, I think for everybody involved, Albert Bell was on a little bit better behavior. And I think also he let his bat do the talking, and, you know, they were able to make it work through the 1996 season.
Any other questions about the book for Zach?
I did just, Jim, I'll reiterate the early 90s when they were up at Canton at Munson Stadium. They were the Canton Akron Indians, and saw all those play. And it was like 15-20 minute drive from Dover going up Route 800. And you could get there and you saw Charles Nagy and Thome and Ramirez, all those guys. And it was pretty neat. A lot of people from Dover made the trip up there to watch those guys when they were at Double A.
they would get 5,000 people a night there at that stadium. Remember how the parking situation was like? It was a
Yeah.
beautiful place to be.
Yep. And I just do remember that 95 team, it was all built around offense. The bats, the very little attention paid to pitching, and, getting to like Eddie Murray. And I think you mentioned even Dave Winfield at the end of their careers. I don't really remember Dave Winfield playing that much. I remember maybe he DH once in a while or outfield once in a while, but yeah, Hall of Famers at the end of their career.
So they got Dave Winfield in '94 in a trade with the Twins, and it was supposed to be, I think it was a player to be named or cash in return. Dave Winfield, like you said, he was at the end of his career, and then the strike hit. So, the Indians got basically nothing out of Dave Winfield in 1994. So I think the story goes, the two teams agreed the Twins would pick up a dinner town, and that would settle it. And then the Indians ended up re-signing Dave Winfield for 95. You're right, he didn't play a lot, but ask any player on that roster and they'll tell you, just having Murray, having Dave Winfield, and not only that, but on the pitching side, you had Dennis Martinez was 40 years old.
Yeah.
Geyser had so much experience. They had a lot of leadership, and that was huge for young guys like Manny Ramirez and Jim Thome and Charles Nagy and others. I remember Paul Shuey, I think, was saying that like Dave Winfield and Eddie Murray used to just sit on the bench and they'd watch the opposing pitcher and they would just tell you, watch, this next pitch is going to be a slider down and away. And it was. All right, this next pitch is going to be a changeup up and in. Like they'd been around so long and they were such prolific hitters that they knew what was going to happen before it happened.
Zach, can you share some of the importance of having Wayne Kirby and Alvaro Espinoza on that team? Nobody mentioned those names yet tonight, but what was their role and how did that impact that team?
So it's interesting because you had all these personalities and it was just, before games sometimes just like a circus. And Mike Hargrove would always say, if the game's at 7, once the clock hits 6 p.m., you're on my time, the circus stops, you focus on what you need to do and get yourself ready. So the one thing that those guys did, Kirby and Espinoza in particular, is, first of all, again, two more veteran guys who provided leadership, who were able to play when someone needed a day off, but also just keeping everybody loose. I mean, this is a team that, yes, they had veterans on the team, but you get to that opening round against the Red Sox, and all of a sudden, like, these games count for more than everyone's used to, and it's intimidating. Manny Ramirez had never played in a playoff game, and Charles Nagy had never pitched in a playoff game. Sandy Alomar had never played in a playoff. So those guys kept things loose. And in particular, I mean, everybody remembers Alvaro Espinoza used to make big bubbles with his bubble gum and stick them on guys' helmets. So, those are two guys who their teammates would name them as being like that glue, that you had all this star power, but without those guys, the stars wouldn't have been able to be stars.
I have a question. This is Jeff. I don't have my video on, but what would you say, Zach, was the biggest distraction, if anything, for that team? Obviously, they had a lot of big personalities. Was there anything that of that kind of went through that clubhouse that they had to deal with, or were they pretty tight group through the whole thing?
So I went into this thinking that I'd wind up with, stories about just some of the off the field stuff really hindering what they wanted to do as a team. But really early on, Mike Hargrove said, look, like, that team, more than any other that he had ever managed, didn't have any singular incident that could derail them. Hargrove said, like, he had never had that before and has never had that since, where there's always something that pops up. And with that team, I mean, there were things. Albert Bell flips over a buffet table, or Albert Bell takes a bat to the thermostat, or Kenny Lofton gets us in a spat with someone. But I think the way the timeline worked, where they got a taste of it in 94 and it was taken away from them with the strike. They came back in 95. I mean, I don't think it's not hyperbole. Like, you're never going to find a team that focused, because they knew how good they could be, but they also weren't, Albert Bell had a really good season in 94. He had decent seasons before that, but like, he was in a competition with himself. He got hot, start the second half, and was like, I want to hit 50 home runs. I mean, they're up 30 games in the division in September. They clinch, and you still can't get Albert Bell out of the lineup. Kenny Lofton, they wanted to pad their stats. They wanted to prove that they were as good as they can be. So it's rare where, like, yes, Albert Bell had his antics and Manny Ramirez was being goofy and not cashing his paychecks and stuff like that. But there was never any incident that like really set them back as a team, which I found surprising, because I thought going into it that would be a slam dunk.
Thanks.
Hey, Zach.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
Good, good. Hey, that being said about 95, how they, the chemistry on that team, it seemed like in 96, the team imploded. What do you think happened in that off season or during that season to make things go from, the way it was in 95 to 96? I mean, they end up trading Eddie Murray and Carlos Baerga and all that stuff. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, so I think the first rule to remember is always, and I feel like I think we're all guilty of falling into this trap, but in any sport, especially baseball and I think football, what you did last year does not mean, if like people want to say, oh, the Indians, the offense struggled last year and now you take away Francisco Lindor, the offense is going to be putrid. And it might be, but it's not because it was bad last year. It's like things year to year, just like things aren't always the same. You don't always have the same mojo. You don't always have the same routines. And so I think that was a little part of it. I think part of it too was, like you said, the roster. And this is what the players, this is how they'd answer it. Carlos Baerga wasn't the same. He had a really rough first half and they ended up trading him. And, so then they had kind of a hole at second base. They traded Eddie Murray. I think some of that hurt in the clubhouse. I think there were some distractions. Kenny Lofton ended up having contract issues at the end of that year. And like, there were just a lot of, in 95, it was just that one singular focus. And in 96, it's like, okay, well, do we need to win 100 games? Do we need to just dominate the opponent every single night? Do we need to prove we can come back from every deficit? No, we did that in 95. It's just all about gearing up for the postseason. And so I don't think there was that pedal on the gas in the same way. Now, they were still a really good team. Obviously, it didn't pan out in the playoffs, but they're definitely, I think some of the chemistry issues, some of the clubhouse issues that came from just a little bit of a different roster. And then what's crazy is by the time they make the World Series in 97, there were only a few guys left. I mean, they had so much turnover on that roster. And those guys will tell you that was to their detriment instead of to their benefit. But it's a good question, because I do think more than anything, it's just, year to year, it's really hard to just be consistent and produce this in the same way. And when you don't have that, it's almost like the 2016 Indians too, because they make the World Series. I don't know that anyone expected them to do that at the beginning of the year. And then in 2017, before they got hot with that 22-game winning streak, they were a 500 team in August. And it's like, well, they didn't, what is the reason to keep it at 60 miles an hour all season? It's like you had proven you can do that. So it's more just get yourself ready for the playoffs. And in 95, they were young, they were naive, and I think that almost helped them.
Hey, this is Jeff again, kind of going off of that. Was there were the players upset with John Hart for some of those, things going on with Kenny and the contract dispute, trading Carlos? What did they hold that against him? I feel like I've heard that somewhere, but I'm not 100% sure if that's accurate or not.
Yeah. It's weird because like the roster changed so much year to year. I mean, like this run really ended in 2001. And if you look at the 2001 roster, like there's nobody on it from the 95, 96 teams. So yeah, I think the mainstays who were there for those first few years, I think some of them were pretty upset. I think everyone was shocked when Kenny Lofton was traded right before opening day in 97. But I mean, Kenny Lofton came right back after that season. So fences were mended on certain fronts. Carlos Baerga ended up coming back in 99. Obviously Albert Bell did not, but yeah, I think there was a lot of questioning, especially because it was just, in their minds, it was like in 95, everything went perfectly until the very end. So why try to fix something that isn't broken? But if you're a general manager or front office person, you're always thinking, what can we do to get better? And, you probably don't have a ton of patience, especially when your team is that good. You want to capitalize on it. So sometimes the players and the people making the decisions in the front office aren't always on the same page.
Any other questions for Zack? Zack, what about Jim Thome, everyone's favorite Hall of Famer from our area? What was he like? He was a young player at that point, not the player we have seen, obviously, in the last 10, 12 years, but he was 30-year player, I think, at that point, maybe. Talk a little bit about what his role was like, starting out as a third baseman there.
It's hard to picture him he was drafted as a shortstop, which I remember when he was on the Indians in 2011, and I was covering that. It was my first year covering the team. And I mean, he was a part-time DH who needed 45 minutes of massaging and attention to his back after taking 3 at-bats. It was hard to picture him, that kid being a shortstop 20 years earlier. But yeah, I mean, he was a third baseman coming up, obviously played there his first few years. And it was rough at the beginning. He remembers airmailing every throw, and really having to learn how to play the position. And, the biggest thing for him was hooking up with Charlie Manuel, who was his hitting coach coming through the minors in the major leagues, and Charlie Manuel really unlocking that potential and teaching him the right batting stance that would put him in the best position to hit for a ton of power. And he obviously did that with more than 600 home runs in his career. No one expected him to be a Hall of Famer or a first ballot Hall of Famer. But I mean, he gets to the majors. He looks like a toothpick. He's so skinny. And then by 95, I mean, he said, he and Sandy Alomar each wrote a foreword for this book. And in Thome's, he says, I was 25 years old. I'm standing on the third base line at the Atlanta Braves Stadium being introduced for the World Series. And he's like, that's when it all hit me. Like, I got to pinch myself because I was just a small farm town boy in rural Illinois. And, never could have imagined playing in the major leagues as badly as he really wanted to. And all of a sudden he's 25 and he's not only is he standing on the baseline for the World Series, but he's surrounded by just all this legendary talent. So he was kind of, he was quiet back then, and it was just like, just follow the lead of Charlie Manuel and Eddie Murray. And, it's amazing to look back at that lineup. And Mike Hargrove said it in the book. He's like, I didn't have to think when filling out the lineup card. I mean, Jim Thome would be hitting 7th or 8th. Manny Ramirez would be hitting 7th or 8th. I mean, he was like, that's the easiest job ever. Like, the names just write themselves because they had so much talent. So yeah, for Thome, it's pretty cool. And I think back then, I don't think anyone would have imagined, especially in 95, that Thome would be the guy with a statue outside of the ballpark, and he'd be the first ballot Hall of Famer. They had so much talent, and he was great, but he was just so unassuming, and had so much potential to still reach in the years after that.
If there's not any other questions about Zack's book, about the 95 era, let's talk a little bit, Zack, about 2021. You want to share your thoughts and insight on What's going on now?
Where do we begin? I don't honestly, I don't know what to expect. There are a lot of players on this roster who are at that point in their career where it's kind of, for some, it's put up or shut up time. For others, this is the year to take that leap. So you look at the rotation, and Shane Bieber's your leader, and then you've got Plesac, Savali, McKenzie, Logan Allen, Cal Quantrill. These are all guys who are 25 or 26. Zach Plesac's actually the oldest at 26. And like guys that age, they go through growing pains. Some of them have breakout years. So your guess is as good as mine as to who's going to break out and who might have a little bit of a setback season. You could say the same thing about the lineup. You know, Josh Naylor seems primed for a breakout, but you don't really know until you see it. And Oscar Mercado seems like he'll be the everyday center fielder, but you know, he was great in 2019 and really bad in 2020. So who knows? And, you know, Jake Bowers or Bobby Bradley, whoever plays first base, you know, it's impossible to know what these guys will do with this playing time just because we've only seen a little bit of them. So I think it's going to be an interesting year in that, you know, for the last 4 or 5 years, we've kind of known what to expect. And what you saw in April was pretty much what you saw in September. There was a year there where like Plesac and Savali came out of nowhere. But for the most part, there hasn't been a ton of unpredictability. And this year, they could win 75 games. They could win 90 games. I don't think I would be shocked by anything. It's just, there's a lot of young talent, but sometimes that talent sinks and sometimes that talent swims. And you don't really know until you put those guys out there and see what they can do. So I know there's a lot of frustration with the fan base, especially after the Lindor trade and, you know, the team not spending a ton of money to really put the team over the edge, over the top the last couple of years. But in a weird way, I'm more interested in watching this team this year just because because of the unknown, I think, and because of the mystery and because of some of the young talent that we just haven't gotten a chance to watch a lot of yet. So there's probably plenty to talk about and a lot of questions. So I'm here for you if you got anything to ask.
I have a
Hey,
quick,
Zach. Oh, I'm sorry. This is Doug. I don't have my camera on either, but did you see Ahmed Rosario trying to play center field at spring training this afternoon? I know it's early, but wow. I think that led to like 9 runs and 1 was earned off Bieber. Do you think he's an option there? Or is he just going to be just like a utility guy for him? Or what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my thought was I was a pitcher in high school, and I remember one game I had to play first base because I think we had a doubleheader and we were desperate. And I will never forget a pop-up coming my way. The sun was out. The second baseman and I looked at each other and the ball dropped between us. And I have never wanted to just disappear into thin air more than that day. And so I can imagine a little tiny bit of what Ahmed Rosario is probably feeling. 3 errors in the first 3 innings. Not pretty. I know Shane Bieber went and found him in the dugout after the 3rd inning and just told him, look, this isn't easy. Like, keep your head up. The guy's never played outfield. You can't blame him. I mean, he's trying. He's been working with their outfield assistant coach, Kyle Hudson. And he played in a B game, which is basically just like a pickup game on a backfield on Sunday morning. And he had 1 ball hit his way. So very, very minimal experience at this. And it's going to be a process. The problem with him is that Andres Jimenez has been so good all spring and has impressed everybody that he's going to be your opening day shortstop. And that leaves Rosario without a position. So they want to just try to find somewhere for him to play. If it's a utility role, that's fine. But you got to play more positions than shortstop if you're going to be the utility guy. And the other issue is that Jose Ramirez is your 3rd baseman. He never takes days off. Cesar Hernandez is your 2nd baseman. He never takes days off. So where's Rosario going to play? I think their answer was, hey, maybe center field, not on opening day or anything like that, but you give Oscar Mercado a couple months to prove he can be the center fielder. If he can't, then maybe by then Rosario has learned center field. But it's all an experiment, and he's kind of just a guy without a position right now. I will say this, and Terry Francona will probably say this, but like one game in a Cactus League environment is not going to define the rest of his career. And Omar Vizquel, I mentioned this in the book, his first game with the Indians in '94, or not his first game, but like his sixth game, he made 3 errors, and the third one was a dropped pop-up that cost the team the game. And he remembered looking around the clubhouse afterwards, and like no one would make eye contact with him. The fans were booing him, saying, "Send this guy back to Seattle." And of course, he made 3 errors the rest of the season and goes on to become like one of the better defensive shortstops ever. So you never know. I don't think Amed Rosario is going to win any Gold Gloves in center field, but it's a process. This probably proves to them that it's going to take a lot longer than maybe they were hoping for.
Noah, you had a question, I think.
Yeah, I was actually just going to bring up Ahmed Rosario, but I had another question too. So, do you think the vibe is different in Cleveland this year since all the rest of the Centrals, has made some moves? Like, I think we're still projected to be second or third, but the Tigers, they got Wilson Ramos and Robbie Grossman, and they have AJ Hinch as the manager now. And the Royals, they got Santana and Benintendi, and re-signed Hunter Dozier, I think. So
This division's pretty good. I mean, there was a stretch there where it was by far the worst division in baseball. And now I think outside of the NL East, which could have at least 4 playoff contenders, it might be the best division in the American League. It's definitely better than the West. Yeah, it's weird because it's all this, a few years ago, they had the second oldest roster in baseball after 2018. And now they're one of the youngest. And it's full of 25-year-olds. And these guys weren't even here when the team was making the playoffs in 2017 and 2018. So there's obviously a lot of unknown, and then there's just not a ton of experience. So it's going to be interesting. I would love to know how 2020, I kind of throw out the window. I would love to know how Tristan McKenzie or Cal Quantrill pitch in a big game in a packed house with playoff implications. I would love to see, I know Josh Naylor had 2 awesome games against the Yankees, but throw 40,000 fans in the stadium and, a wild card spot on the line, and let's see what he can do. So yeah, there's a different vibe. Leadership is coming from Shane Bieber, who's 25 years old. It's coming from Roberto Perez. It's coming from some younger guys that just have to step up. So it's definitely different than teams that I think we're used to in Cleveland, who had Corey Kluber, who had Michael Brantley, Josh Tomlin, Jason Kipnis, Carlos Santana. I mean, those guys who are mainstays. Now if you've been here for 2 years, congratulations, you're a veteran and you're a leader. So it's definitely different. And those games, the Indians used to just destroy the Tigers. They went 18-1 that year. That's probably not going to happen. So it's going to be a lot tougher, but should make for a more competitive and enjoyable race down the stretch.
I have a question about the name change. Obviously, that's kind of a hot topic, but I just kind of wanted to take a different route to it. When, growing up an Indians fan, listening to Tom Hamilton, just kind of imagining that day when we finally do win a World Series. Like, I was thinking about it the other day. Once we have our new name, say we win the World Series at some point in the next, 10 years, hearing Tom Hamilton kind of announce that the Cleveland whatever our World Series champions just isn't going to feel the same. You know what I'm saying? That nostalgia feels lost. Is that similar for you, or kind of how would you put that in the historical context with the team?
That's a great question. I hadn't thought about that, but it's interesting. I think that's why people feel so strongly. My stance on this issue for years has been I refuse to care one way or the other because it's so polarizing and it's a topic that will never end. And if you write an article about it, it's going to have hundreds of comments and everyone's going to be yelling at each other. And it's just, I feel like it eats away at my brain. So I've tried to, because I'm just around it every day of my life, I've tried to minimize how much I think about it. But it is an important thing to a lot of people, and in either direction. And I think that's an interesting point, because it's like, if they win the World Series next year, and Tom Hamilton says, you know, the Spiders' 74-year title drought is over, you are going to have to stop and think, like, that doesn't sound right. So I hadn't thought about that, and that is, I mean, that's interesting. Like, I think people have a connection, and I'm not saying that the name shouldn't be changed, but I think people have a connection to, you know, they had a connection to the logo, they have a connection to the name, and they have closets full of gear with the name. So I understand if there's an attachment there. And it's certainly, I mean, I had this conversation. I was on the radio up here a couple of weeks ago, and I didn't even mean anything by it, but I said Cleveland baseball in my opening sentence. And the host was like, wait, did you just intentionally not say Indians? And I was like, you know, I didn't even think about it. But like, I think we all, it's when they do change the name, good luck trying to just seamlessly transition and never refer to them as the Indians, whether you're Tom Hamilton or Matt Underwood or Terry Francona or Zack Meisel writing a story about them. Like, it's going to be tough, just because, I mean, they've been named that for more than 100 years. So yeah, I had not thought about that, but thinking about Tom Hamilton saying that now, I mean, what if he screwed up and said Indians at that time just because he had imagined that moment for decades? That's a great question.
Zach, I've got a question. It's kind of a cliche, you know, make or break season, but boy, there's a handful of names like Bowers and Mercado and Zimmer, you know, that could be in that discussion. I mean, pretty soon that we're going to run out of time or options or whatever, and we'll have to move on. It just seems unusual that there's that many, that when we acquired them or when we brought them up, there was such high potential, but yet none of them have reached that potential yet. And there may be others, but those three come to mind.
Yeah, part of the issue is, so they refused to do the rebuild in the traditional sense. We saw the Astros do this way back when. We saw the Cubs do it. The Tigers and Royals are trying to emerge from that now. They won't do that. They will not tear it down and, you know, lose 100 games just to get that high draft pick. And you know, they plan to contend. Part of it is they feel like if they went through that stretch for 4 or 5 years, no one would ever come to the games and they would be in financial despair, and who knows if the team would even be viable in Cleveland. But part of it, so as they've tried to contend and they've caught themselves in this awkward purgatory because they haven't been spending money to supplement the core, but they're still trying to contend. So you had Lindor and Ramirez and this talented rotation, and it was good enough to get to the playoffs most years, but wasn't good enough to win the World Series. But in doing that, you know, you're trying to plug holes with veterans who you feel confident can give you something. You know, whether that was Rajai Davis and Mike Napoli, or Melky Cabrera, or, you know, sometimes it didn't work. Hanley Ramirez and Carlos Gonzalez were disasters. They went that route because it seemed safer than like giving Daniel Johnson at bats last year, or, you know, they went to Mingo Santana instead. They went to Lino DeShields when things got rough with Oscar Mercado because they felt they couldn't afford to just let Mercado play through his struggles. So when you do that, you get to the point now where you're right. Bowers is out of options. Well, you didn't give him any chances last year, so you still don't know what he can do. Daniel Johnson had 13 plate appearances last season. So now you come into this year, you have no idea what he can do in the majors. You still don't have a clear picture of who Mercado is. So, and Zimmer is 28 years old already. So it's like they've caught themselves in this weird spot where they haven't found out about these younger guys, and they're getting older in a hurry, and they are running out of minor league options. So you're going to have to get answers on them quickly, or what happens to them, you know, they might turn into the next Giovanni Urshela, who, you know, flopped here, flopped in Toronto, and blossomed into a star in New York, or Jesus Aguilar, who was blocked by Edwin Encarnacion and Carlos Santana and had a couple nice years with Milwaukee and Miami. So it's tough. They keep finding themselves in a tough position with that.
Hey, Zach, I have a follow-up question to that. By the way, I follow you on Twitter. Thanks for all the posts. You're a great follow. And thanks to the library for putting this on too. But do you think management is starting to take a more aggressive approach with trying out the youngsters instead of clinging on to the veterans? For example, like I saw they dealt Mike Freeman last week. There's a guy that years past, I'm sure they would have kept on the roster and waste his time instead of trying to develop a guy like Yu Chang. Do you think they're trying to go that route more now? I think it'd be more exciting for the fans. And I know you sink or swim with these prospects, but my gosh, it'd be more exciting, I think, to watch these guys and see some glimmers of hope than these veterans.
Yeah, I do. And I think part of it is, first of all, with the pitching staff, I mean, they've traded away every veteran. So now you're left with all these young guys. But they're young and they're talented. And so that's not an issue. And you might have, I mean, Bieber, Plesac, Savali, McKenzie, Allen, and Quantrill, your 6 guys, they're all under team control for like 4, 5, 6 more years. So that's a group that can grow together and can be really good. And then on the position player side, part of the reason is they have this wave of prospects coming. Most of them are infielders. But like you've seen, if you've paid attention in the spring, you've seen Tyler Freeman, who the kid's going to hit 300 every year of his career. And Owen Miller, who they got in the Mike Clevenger trade, who they really like. He'll probably debut at some point this year. Those are 2 infielders. Gabriel Arias, who is kind of the centerpiece of the Clevenger trade, has a rocket arm and can hit for some power. And if he cuts down on strikeouts, he could be really good at shortstop, maybe third base. So they have all these guys come, like those 3 guys are probably like Freeman and Arias are probably more 2022 than 2021, but they're pushing. And so it's like, yeah, like they need to get answers on some of these young guys so that if those guys aren't the answers, it's like, okay, well, we have Arias, we have Freeman, let's get them up here and see what they can do. So yeah, it was almost like an awakening. And they traded Mike Freeman and they cut Billy Hamilton, and they did that pretty early in camp. They didn't even wait till the last minute to kind of make fans sweat a little bit about those guys making the roster ahead of Yu Chang or somebody else. So yeah, I do think there's a little bit of a change in philosophy. I think it's also, I mean, it's a way to keep the team cheaper. Not that I'm supporting that, but you know, if you rely on the young guys, those young guys, it takes a while before you get to arbitration and you start really making money, and you can keep the payroll down. And, you know, then you're spending on guys like Eddie Rosario, or you're trading for someone more established who might make a little cash. And I think they believe that it's kind of what Tampa's done. In a way, it's like what Oakland's done, and they think that that's more sustainable.
Hey, Zach, can I get your opinion on who you think will fill out those last few bullpen spots? Do you think Brian Shaw is going to be one of them in the back of the pen there? I assume Oliver Perez is probably going to be the main lefty, but is one of those young guys gonna grab a spot too, like a Kyle Nelson or anybody like that?
Yeah, so they're going to take 8 relievers, although they have so many off days in the first 2 weeks. I think it's like they have 3 in the first 8 days. And then there's a 4th one at some point. So I think what they're going to do is take 5 starters, but put one of the starters in the bullpen for 10 days, That would give them a ninth reliever technically. So let's see, Karinchak, Wickgren, Maton, Clase, I'm really excited to watch him pitch. Those four, that's a pretty solid quartet to start with. I think Plutko's going to be there as like a long guy. This Trevor Stephan kid, who's a Rule 5 pick from the Yankees, who throws pretty hard. They like him. He either has to make the roster or they have to send him back to New York, so he'll probably make it. So that's the 6. And then, if I had to guess, I would say Brian Shaw and then a lefty, either Oliver Perez or Kyle Nelson. Blake Parker has a chance. He's another veteran that they added. Nelson's good. Anthony Gose has been like perfect this spring. Throws 100, has a decent off-speed pitch. The only thing with him is he's a converted outfielder, and I know that they want him to get as many reps as possible. So I would think one of those 3 lefties would make it, but my guess is like Nelson probably should be the guy, but I feel like I could see them sending him to the minors and going with either Perez, probably Oliver Perez, maybe first, and then if Perez flames out, you call up Kyle Nelson or Ghost. Could be a good bullpen. A lot of hard throwers.
Do you think that the downfall this year might be more their competition in the division? I know you already kind of briefly touched on that, but more so than the talent of this team, because maybe you have the same team the last few years, they would make the playoffs, but because of the improvements of the other teams in the division, is that going to be more of the hurdle?
Yeah, it could be. You're not going to have games against the Tigers where you can throw out your 5th best starter and your B lineup and still win 7-2. It's always so unpredictable. It feels like the Indians do this, but I think most teams do it where you just for some reason there's always a team that's a thorn in your side. Like 2 years ago when the Indians fell a game or 2 short of the wild card and they won 93 games, but couldn't beat the White Sox backups in the last week, and the White Sox had just really played them tough all year. For some reason that always happens. And then there's always a team that you beat up on that you probably have no business beating up on. The Central's going to be tough. I think, especially in baseball where that imbalanced schedule, you play your division opponents 19 times and you see other teams only 6 or 7. And so I think like the AL West, I think is not very good. I don't think the Astros are as good as they've been in recent years, but the Mariners are still rebuilding and the Rangers are a mess and Oakland is probably a little bit worse. So the Astros are kind of the opposite of what you're referring to, because I think they're probably a worse team than they've been the last few years, but they could beat up on their division foes and have a good record and make the playoffs. So yeah, for the teams in the Central, there should be a lot of competition. And even though, maybe the White Sox and Twins they might be 2 of the 3 best teams in the American League. But you might not be able to tell by the record because the Royals are going to be better. The Indians probably aren't going to be a pushover, and the Tigers are better than they've been the last couple of years.
Welcome, Ryan. If you have any questions for author Zack Meisel, go ahead and ask. We're just talking about the 21 season, or if you have any questions at all. Not to put you on the spot. While you're ruminating that, Zach, what about Tito with his health concerns? How long do you think he's going to be around as a manager of the Indians?
-6 months. I was surprised. I ran into him. Obviously, he was away from the team in September, but I ran into him during that month, and the way he was talking, just everything he had been through. We're talking some really, really serious days in the ICU, and he had 3 pretty intensive surgeries in the span of 4 days. And that's separate of all the gastrointestinal procedures he had been having over the previous year. And he was just talking about how like he didn't know how he was going to pull through and what it was going to look like on the other side. And he's then recovering in his apartment downtown and is sitting just going stir crazy every day. And it was pretty rough, and it would have made all the sense in the world to just retire. I don't think anyone would have blamed him. Serious health issues. The team is going through a youth movement. It's going to be a lot tougher, not only just getting through a 162 game grind, but you're not going to have your familiar veteran faces in the clubhouse, and you're going to have to go through young players' growing pains and trying to put together a roster. And I not that I was shocked that he returned, but I wouldn't have been surprised had he retired. And so what it shows you is he doesn't know what he would do with himself. I think he wants to manage until he physically cannot anymore. And physically he can, because last night he got fitted for an insert in his shoe that's going to allow him to ditch the boot he's been wearing all spring, and he'll be able to move around a little bit better in the dugout. And so, he'll do whatever he can to get back to normal, or as normal as possible, just so he can be in that clubhouse. Because if he didn't have baseball, if he didn't have this job, I think he would just be going nuts. So, yeah, I don't know it could be 1 year, it could be 2 years. I don't think it'll be 10 or 8 or even 5. But if he didn't retire after last season, I would think that I wouldn't be shocked if he managed another 2 years, maybe managed to the end of his contract.
Any other questions out there?
Yeah, Zach, I've got another one. It's kind of an uncomfortable one, but what is your take, being kind of an insider on the whole Mickey Callaway thing with the Indians, and what they knew and what they didn't know and what they maybe covered up? I don't know. What can you tell us about that, if anything?
Yeah, it's a little messy at this point, just because we don't know. MLB they launched an investigation, and we don't know what they're looking for or what they may have found. I work at the Athletic, and we have written the stories that have kind of put this in the spotlight. It's tough, because I think, it's not a secret of how well run an organization it has been in terms of the culture that Chris Antonetti and company have implemented. But at the same time, it's clear, no matter what was consensual, what wasn't, who knew what, and Chris Antonetti has said this, it's clear there was not a system in place for people to feel comfortable coming forward to report what was going on. And so that is a tactical error, and Antonetti has taken responsibility, and Paul Dolan has taken responsibility, and they've vowed that will change. And I think this is also eye-opening just across not only the league, but sports in general, of just having these cultures where women can't be in the clubhouse without being approached by someone they don't want to be approached by. And so, look, it's people have asked me, was this really the worst kept secret, and what was all going on? It's I have no idea what Mickey Callaway did or didn't do. I read the story just like everybody else. It's not something that we see being in the clubhouse for an hour every afternoon. But it's clear that at some point, the culture needs to change, so that people can confidently come forward and say, hey, this is what's going on, and you need to look into it, because it needs to stop, because it's toxic. And I don't know how long an investigation is going to take. I don't think anybody except those involved know who knew what when. And I mean, it's a shame that this is a topic. It's a shame that this, something like this has to take place for people to wake up to realize that, you know, you need to make some changes, and then the culture needs to be improved. And I think it's something that probably has cost a lot of people sleep in Cleveland's front office, just knowing that all this was going on for years, and either they didn't know anything about it or they knew about it and didn't step up to take action. No shortage of topics with this team, though, right? I mean, that's going on. They're going to change a name. They've dropped the payroll by billions of dollars. They traded their star. They've got a lot of young, intriguing talent. Does anybody care? And it's oh, and there's a pandemic. So a lot going on. Not a lot of it very positive, but
Well, here's a fun one. Who's the nicest guy in the clubhouse? If you have any insight on that.
the nicest. Maybe Oliver Perez. Maybe Josh Naylor. There's a lot of nice guys because they're so young. They don't know any better yet. They're not older and abrasive and annoyed by the media's presence.
So back to the name change. Do you have any insight or any guesses as to what it's going to be? I know you said Spiders. I know that was probably just maybe it's just to say something, but do you think it's going to be Spiders, or do you have any insight into that or guesses?
I have no idea. I don't envy them. It's a big decision, right? I mean, you're going to probably tick off a lot of people no matter what you choose. And this is going to be your merchandise, your branding, your giant logo atop the scoreboard for years to come. So you better get it right. Spider seems to be like the most popular, but also maybe the most polarizing. We ran a bracket on The Athletic and Guardians won, but there was something suspicious about the voting in the semifinals where that part of the bracket, it was Guardians versus Spiders, had thousands more votes than the other half of the bracket, which if you're filling out a bracket, why would you only fill out half? So I don't know what happened there. Maybe some Russian bots or something interfered. But yeah, Spiders and Guardians seem like the most popular. I don't really have a strong opinion. I've kind of grown fond of Hazards after Oliver Hazard Perry, who I think helped lead the battle at Lake Erie or something. I should probably brush up on that. I think it's unique and sounds cool. And I don't know. I'm just kind of tired of Guardians and Spiders at this point, but I fully expect, I would think one of those would win, but I really don't know. I don't think they have any idea either. I know they're in the part of the process where they're just trying to see what people think and get ideas, but we could have an answer in, I don't know, 8 months, 9 months.
Are they going to play the 2022 season with the new name, you think? Could this be the official last year of the Indians? Is that pretty set in stone?
I think that's the hope, but I think they purposefully kind of left that off just to give them wiggle room in case this takes longer than they were anticipating. But that's the expectation, yeah.
I have another quick question. My brothers and I are big fans of the Naylor brothers, and I was just wondering when you think Bo Naylor might come up to Cleveland. I think he's supposed to be in Lake County this year, and he's still behind Roberto and Austin Hedges. So I didn't know what you thought about where he stood.
Yeah, and just I mean, it's the coolest story to have two brothers potentially playing on the same team. I wrote a story. I talked to their family a couple of weeks ago, and like they're just on cloud nine because when Josh got traded, like the mom called Bo or texted Bo and said, "Your brother just got traded," and Bo's like, "Where?" Thinking, I mean, there's 29 other teams he could have been traded to, so thinking the odds of Cleveland are pretty low, and he's just sitting there like waiting for a reply, like, "Come on, tell me already." And then she said Cleveland, and they went crazy. I would think Bo Naylor is probably the starting catcher in 2023. I would think, I mean, Roberto Perez has another club option for $7 million for 2022. You could also have Austin Hedges for one more year, and then I think Bo Naylor would probably be that guy. But I also think it's possible he could make his debut at some point next year. The timeline for all these prospects is thrown off a little bit just because there was no minor league season last year. So you don't know if guys, if someone played at high A in 2019, do they go to double A to start this year? Do you just act like they would have played at double A in 2020, so they start at triple A? It's different for everybody. So I would say 2023 is probably a safe bet, but maybe he debuts next year.
Okay, let's do one more question and we'll wrap things up. Anyone have a question out there for Zack? Okay, I'll do the last one then, Zack. If you had to give advice to an aspiring writer, namely someone who has a passion for sports and wants to be in your business, what advice would you give them, Zack?
Ooh, that's the toughest question yet. I would say just keep writing. Like, even if you don't have the job you want, you're not covering the sport you want, you're job hunting, you're just write. Because the more you write, the more you're going to hone that craft and the more creative you're going to be. And I think creativity is really important because there's so many outlets, so many writers, and it's hard to stand out these days. And so I think you can try to find something different that other people don't have to offer. That's how you're really going to be able to end up doing exactly what you want to do. And I think the best way to try to think creatively is just read and write as much as you can.
That's some good advice. Now, in a non-pandemic year, we would have Zack here in this building doing a book signing following. We'd have, Barnes & Noble here selling books, or we'd get them through Zack or however we would do it. Unfortunately, we're not able to do that. I will say that there is a bookshop here in downtown Dover called the Bibliophile. If you want to go see Dave Jones, he can get you Zack's book. Zack, I don't know if you have a preferred avenue for purchasing your books. Do you have off your website, Triumph Books, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I like to say you can get it at all the usual places, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or Triumph Books, but especially in these times, I always recommend going local. If you got a local bookshop, it's pretty much anywhere in the northern half of Ohio if there's a bookstore. So yeah, any of those places. And it is coming out, I've got the hardcover now that came out last May, and it'll be out in paperback actually in about 6 weeks.
Yeah, great. Well, when you have your next project in book format, Zack, we'll have you back down in better times, okay? So you can meet everybody in person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I appreciate you guys having me, and thanks for all the questions and the discourse.
Thank you, Zack. Thanks, Jim.
Everyone. Have a good night. Go Tribe.